Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I also would like to introduce first of all my colleagues who are with me here, which is Norbert Große-Entrup. Some of you met him on the Icebreakers session yesterday, Klaus Schopf. He's here, my partners in the Schuh Complexity Management Group, and Stefan Rudolph. He's gone somewhere. He is just the chairman of our new founded Complexity Management Academy, since we learned over now 26 years that it might be helpful to have something like an ongoing, constant benchmarking approach with leading players in industry on that, and that we recognize that well, as we just learned from Greg Hamel, that it's not an easy business to teach or to learn. So training in-house, training out-house might be helpful. I took that topic, lean innovation, even though we started some 26 years ago with complexity management, and basically in my understanding, it's just the backside of the same medal. What do we want to achieve if we are more capable to manage complexity? One important issue, and we couldn't have learned that better than with Greg's introductory speech, is that we have to increase efficiency and effectiveness in innovation. And so some 10 years ago, we founded a kind of German subsidiary of the Lean Initiative with Jim Womack and Dan Jones in Aachen. And I got the honorable responsibility to look on the topic lean innovation. Is it transferable from lean production, from lean thinking, from lean services, administration, and so forth? And finally, we found that circle which says it is not one-to-one adaptable. And it's not 5 principles, it's only 4 principles. And we thought that are the most important things to go for in lean innovation, which is finding strategic priorities on what we try to innovate. Because one consideration is that we have not the right priorities. We want to be innovative. We assume it might be in that direction, but we set R&D projects, we start R&D projects that go this way, this way, this way, and not always in that clear strategic direction. That is the first dimension. The second one, which I would like to concentrate later on, is structuring. Structuring on the product and on the process side, and which I think is very much in line, even though we couldn't talk very much before. I'm very thankful for that speech, Greg. That is, I think, very much in line. So I come to that later. It is about the variety on the market side, product range optimization. Especially, as you mentioned, Europe is difficult. We in Europe, especially in Germany, we tend to overload that. If we have any doubts where to go, more variants or less variants, we don't have to think that in Europe. I think that's a genetic code. We go right to the right and say more variants might be better than less. And to be honest, in the last 30 years, we were quite successful with that turning right. So we still believe that's the better choice. I come to that later. The third thing is synchronization, perhaps the better English or German word, if you wish, to the word lean. It's about synchronization. How do you do that? And one topic on that conference, very important topic, is there is just one single source of truth in data management. That is that magic button which you can push through an R&D project and see where that project stands. I mean, in any detail if you wish, and in an overview. And I'm always looking, since I'm working on PDM, PLM since 20 years, who has that bottom? I mean, some people have a bottom and they push it, but do they see that picture? And in that completeness that we all need to be very lean, to be very efficient. And the last part is adapting over a lifetime of the product, which means, like the software people, we have so complex products right now that we should learn from them and don't take just change requests like we did in the past. It should be something like releases to get an order of changing in that. Now, just the entry picture is probably the picture all of you can show in your businesses. It is very typical. It's not necessarily a Porsche problem. In a way, it always goes in that direction. And when I started my career in that topic with my first research project, those days, Wolfgang Reitzler was the R&D, head of R&D at BMW. Even in those days, which is 30 years ago, 29 years ago, he said, our topic can't be purely a reduction of variety. We have to be those, at least as BMW, who can provide these more efficiently and more effectively. And that is the story since then. And as Greg told us already, I'm completely convinced. And that is not only the message for premium OEMs, I think it's the message over all the market. Most of them earn their money with those products that are end customer configured, which basically means that there is a lot of variety that you can choose on. All these figures are not surprising for you, as you are all experts in that field. I have a very similar diagram here, like Greg showed you. This diagram has a distinction in the benefits and the efforts about complexity. In the middle, it's always low. And so if we start from the outside, the one thing, if we want to get a structural benefit, and that means to achieve a modular product architecture, we typically start with challenging the external complexity, which is our product range. So how many benefit do we gain and to what effort? That's what we learned before. A lot of companies still have to optimize that. It's probably a thing since more than 10 years. And the good ones, like we learned just from Ford, they know how to do that. But in my assumption, I'm in that market long enough. 70–80% of the players in the market do not know how to do that, like we learned it from Ford Motor Company. The control of complexity would mean that you really, on purpose, put products out of modules together, and that is the capability to really have a configuration space which is designed on purpose. In our understanding, a new product should always start with the positioning in the configuration space. And later on, of course, you need that configurator. First the R&D configurator, and later the market, the customer's configurator. That is very important. The configuration rules in many companies are not clear and completely set. And if they are not complete, you can't say that you have control over these configuration space. Third is about flexibility in production. And that big issue is global players issue, like you learned before. Because even though you have standard parts, you have different sites, you have different types of production technologies, you have different suppliers. Who has control on that? I will give you an example from our side later on. And as I want to focus very much on what is the design rule, or should be design rules of a modular product architecture. In my experience, I have seen hundreds of starting activities to set up a modular product architecture. I've only seen a very few up to now that survived the first period of life, which means the first period of lifetime of the first product based on that modular platform. So there are a lot of things that you can do wrong that these, let's say, architectures explode in a way. They don't stick to that what you want to achieve. So some 3 years ago, we started an exercise because we thought we have to experience that on a different level. And that meant we thought, on the one hand, on the left side, you see the bigger bubbles in segmentation of markets in the auto industry was quite different to that what we see right now, much smaller but much more bubbles. And the future will have even more bubbles. And then 2008, 2009, the idea of pure electrical cars came up, and we thought that is a significant technology change which offers the opportunity to really do it properly from scratch. And we said, we now build a new product type, and we start not with the first design of the first car, rather than designing an architecture. And so we designed, or we configured an architecture of cars from a very small one, a 3-meter city car, to 4.6 meter very light vehicle, you would say, very light commercial vehicle. And the important part for us was that we thought electrical car, citation is Atterbeck, will not have a dominant design within the next 10 to 15 years. So that means, to a certain extreme, what Greg said, the number of pieces you can sell from one type of car will be significantly lower than what at least the auto industry is used to have. Very small numbers of pieces and no real scaling up in traditional volumes. So what we are going to sell now, starting next year, is 20,000 of this car, that we developed. Occasionally, I must say, because basically we are consultants and researchers, we do not want to buy cars, but to produce cars. But nobody believed us. That's the disadvantage of researchers and consultants. If you have no luck, nobody believes you in the very beginning. So we started with that architecture, and we said, okay, we have in the end we have 8 types, but these are the corner types, and we said there must be a generic product structure be possible, which puts the effects, the scale effects, to the extreme. And since we believed in 2010 that typical pure electrical cars will have a very big problem because they will be more expensive, significantly more expensive than traditional cars because of battery and parts of the electronics and powertrain. And on the other hand, the value, the benefit for the customer is significantly lower than with a traditional car, because we have that, I don't know the English word, the eierlegende Wollmilchsau. We have typically cars that can do everything. They can go 1,000 kilometers in distance, and they can go 200 kilometers fast. And they can be used into inner cities, and they can do everything. So an electrical car can't do that. No way, never. So the disadvantage of a solid energy reservoir can't be solved ever. So this is always an equation that you can't overcome. So we thought, with this in mind, much higher potential costs, less use, we have to have a very frugal design approach. And the first thing, again, like Greg said, is return on engineering. So we said we need to have a different approach than the traditional. And I say it again, we didn't want to become an auto company. Finally, we became an auto company, which is, and I'm the CFO of that company, and I didn't want to be that, but it was just because the established branch was not ready to really listen to different ideas. And so it comes from platform, from architecture. And I'd like to explain that in the following slides. First of all, the distinction of commonality. From the very beginning, we thought, I have to state, before that, I have to state as a recommendation, never ever design new single product lines anymore. Times it's over to do that. Just one type of car. It's not even the time of creating product families, it's kind of clans. So don't only think about brother and sister of a product line or father and son. It is sisters and aunts and uncles, and it's a whole big family that you should have in mind when you set up an architecture. And that is even necessary, very much necessary, if you don't start from scratch. In our case, we were kind of forced to start from scratch. And if you do so, we recommend to distinguish 4 types or 4 levels of commonality. The overall, the long end goal of commonality, physical commonality, having the same parts, having standard parts, is adorable, is necessary. If you can achieve that, very nice. But if you can't, it makes very much sense to, for instance, at least conclude on the level of technology commonality. So parameters, geometry can be slightly different, but the design and the functionality or the technology you use can be the same, can be similar, can be reused, and that is part of return on engineering. That StreetScooter that you have seen, we call our car and our company StreetScooter. That StreetScooter, for instance, we have approximately reduced the development time by 50%. So it was a bit less than 2.5 years to get the series production ready from scratch from a not existing company. StreetScooter is a company of 36 people and 80 suppliers involved that never worked together in that way before. They worked in some other OEM projects together, but not in that constellation. And we needed 30 million euro to get that car ready. We will produce 20,000 of that. That includes the production facility of the final assembly. And the comparable number would be 300 million at least of investment if you do that in a traditional infrastructure. That was just to prove that it works. We promised that with our concepts, and typically as researchers we were used that some people at least believed us. This time unfortunately, we had no real believers, so we had to go a step or two further. The idea behind is to find the driving parameters, the constitutional parameters of such a modular platform. And I think we could easily use that example of the modular square platform of Volkswagen, because there finally, that is one of the big strengths of the platform of Volkswagen, that they found the one most important constitutional parameter, which is even an artificial parameter. They call it the technical length. And the technical length is that. That constitutes all 40 heads, all 40 different cars from Scirocco, New Beetle, Seat Toledo, Skoda Octavia, Golf, of course, down to the Polo, up to the Passat. The constitutional length is the distance between the front axle and the bottom part of the accelerator pedal, which is a very artificial measure. But it constitutes that important internal part from the body inside, very customer-oriented, and the front end of the car. And all other parameters are not fixed, and there are intervals in which you can have variable dimensions in the complete length, even in the width of the car. That's the first time shown in the modular longitude platform of Audi, where they really were the first, I think, that really offered two dimensions of cars with exactly the same architecture. That means the Audi A6 is 5 centimeters wider than the Audi A4, but the complete rest of the architecture, Mr. Alders can explain that even better, including all components in the axle are the same. Never done at that time before. This is 15 years old. The potential is very clear, and back to the basic idea, we should come from the commonality of technology and processes. So all the tools and dies and processes and technologies should be should provide the parameters for the design of, for instance, the body structure. And this is a yin-yang approach where we should probably look earlier and more intensively on the production parameters which are relevant to constitute the product parameters. Just to show that, and I think that's again the same story that Greg already told you, the important part to have that kind of onion peel approach, where you in the very early stage, in the early specification of a product, define precisely what is in the inner circle. What are the rigid and robust parameters and parts that you don't want to alter over lifetime? Next onion peel is those where you have at least, let's say, an interval in which you could alter over lifetime some constitutional parameters, and on the outside where you even want to change quite often the design that you provide with that to keep the product fresh and modern. That's a bit of an approach how to distinguish that. Here's an example. What typically should be on the internal part. For instance, we do that with the EE architecture, with the modular interior concept, with the chassis and body architecture things, and which should be in the inner circle. And all this is linked with rules, modular constitutional rules for each of these components or sub-assembly groups or functional groups. And it's very important to set that so that you derive from there where you gain the economies of scale and communality on the process side. So the same onion peel model results on the process side out of that product communality which you described on that onion peel model. So there you easily can say where you can change things and where you have really to freeze things. The dilemma is very clear. We learned that before. I hope we discussed that all the 2 days. High number of derivatives, common use of resources. It is always this optimization thing of added value depth. What do you do on your own? Make or buy, improved efficiency. But what I want to stress a bit, it is the very intensive negotiation between the modular process architecture and the modular product architecture. For our street scooter, for instance, this is a typical body structure, how it is fixed with spot welding devices conventionally done. And what we did, we had a forming device from Trumpf, which you can see more or less here. And they advised us to take these K-knots, like they call them, where you can form all these metals not on an individualized expensive tool, but on a standard bending and pressing device. So that is a standard combination which we finally end up to form. Instead of that, we formed that bottom part like this, which you can alter from piece to piece now. You can have a stronger version now for higher load, and you have, in the end, what is the key of my story, almost no tool and no fixture and no invest in type and variant specific components. A little picture from a just different, this is not car business, other project, it is white goods product, where they thought they had a huge family, a world provider of white goods, and this is just an overview about the different technologies they had in these different areas. Presses, welding, different manufacturing processes, gluing systems, assembly lines. This is not the number of assembly lines they have. They have, I don't know, 18 locations in the world. It is the number of different types of technologies. And the numbers of different types of products is significantly lower than the different types of technologies that are used. So the benefit, the scale effect you earn on the production side, and when we were ready, that was the result. And I want to stress that, with no limitation, extra limitation on the product side, on the product variety. So the difference between this and that was of no use, of no value on the market, on the customer side at all. This is potential if you look from the process side on these subjects. Or in figures coming from 91 different technologies to 24 different technologies. These potentials in nowadays, and not 15 or 20 years ago, are still around 70, 60, 70, 75%. So enormous potentials that we can achieve. My last statement will be, don't leave it with the PDP, the product development process. To have an architecture, and this, as you learned from Greg, and I'm in the same line, stop ideas of world car or world product concepts. They very seldom work. I mean, if you tell that the Porsche people, they say in our case it works. But I say, 100,000, that is nothing for Ford. I mean, 100,000 cars are, as a world car to supply in the world is a different story. So these exceptions to the rule may occur. But no world product, no world car concepts will be of help. The world architecture is of help. And that needs to be developed, maintained like a product. So we need, additionally to our conventional, more or less conventional product development process, a product architectural development process, which we also do not just develop once. We have to maintain that, we have to improve that, and we have to make sure that it fits. That means all that roadmaps are important, and the most important roadmap in the future is not that roadmap, it's that roadmap. The commonality, the maximum of commonality can be driven out of the modular roadmap. And from there, for instance, occasionally, those days, in your days, Mr. Allers, the Audi TT appeared. Occasionally. The Audi people hadn't even the order to do it. This MQ, PQ34 came up. They had to do the A3 out of that, the Golf platform. And then they said, well, we don't like that BMW Z3 or Z4, and we have nothing against it. And so they said, okay, we take that platform. And then they asked for a budget and the official acceptance that they could design that TT. And they didn't get it. Have you ever heard of submarine R&D projects? I think it was for a period of time, what a kind of submarine project, which they couldn't have afforded if they wouldn't have had that platform. And it was a very, as you know, successful thing. So what I want to state, it's not just only the important relation between product, program, roadmap, and production technology roadmap. It's also about module roadmap And as Greg said, production site roadmaps, because even the next plants, the next generation plants will be significantly larger than those in the past. And they will concentrate more on product lines like Ford does it. But nevertheless, they have to be designed like this, that the next but one, or the next plant you design has always to contribute on that all existing plants must be reduced in complexity through that new plant. I conclude, complexity topic is not new, but the importance is just now increasing. The consequence means coordination on the product, on the modular product side, but also, and at the same level, on eye level, on the process architecture side. And we advise to use such an onion peel or shell model to systematically derive that architecture, and they're standardized and or in distinction to the more flexible zones. And we advise also to establish an official PADP, product architecture development process, like the product development process. Thank you very much.